Hey guys, Lawrence here. Welcome back to another AIRTOC demo. Today, we're focusing in on one of the most important deliverables in the entire planning phase, requirements documentation. In this lesson, we'll walk you through what requirements documentation is, why it's essential for defining scope, and how it supports downstream planning and deliverable development all the way through. Then, as always, we'll jump into a live AIRTOC demo so you can see exactly how to produce requirements documentation using the AIMPM Project Management Coach. First, let's start with PMI's definition. PMI defines requirements documentation as a description of how individual requirements meet the business need for the project. It captures and records the project's product requirements and other associated information that ensures traceability, clarity, and alignment with stakeholder expectations. In all reality, this definition really just scratches the surface of requirements gathering. So let's take a closer look. From our perspective, requirements documentation is a lot deeper. It's a formal record of what the project must deliver to meet stakeholder needs, but it gets a lot deeper than that. It really is more of a detailed description of business needs, stakeholder needs, functional requirements, non-functional requirements. It should be a clear explanation of what must be true for the solution to be accepted, a foundational input for the scope statement, the work breakdown structure, development plans, etc. It's a tool for eliminating ambiguity and aligning on expectations. It's a tool to trace requirements back to the original requester. And it really does translate what stakeholders need and what the project must deliver. Now, this is the bridge between stakeholder expectations and actual project execution. And it takes place very early on in your project. Part of the reason why I think PMI's definition may be lacking here is because requirements gathering isn't necessarily a project manager's job. It's usually reserved for someone like a business analyst, but most times the PM ends up doing the requirements gathering anyway. And if there was one core competency I wish PMI would improve, it would be requirements gathering. Why? Because requirements feed all other aspects of the project work, including your work breakdown structure, your project plan, your project schedule, right? Missing requirements equals missing scope. And that's why we focus on it here. It's as important as any other skill in project management. So why is requirements documentation important? Well, it really defines your boundaries. It helps you with alignment. It reduces a lot of rework. It helps establish your acceptance criteria. It supports traceability all the way back to the person that requested it in the first place, and it anchors your scope. When your requirements are weak, vague, or incomplete, your scope will be wrong, your deliverables will be wrong, and your project will definitely drift. This is why it's incredibly important to gather good requirements up front, and we give lots of insights into this in the Module 2 textbook, so make sure you take a look. Just consider this. A project is a marathon, not a sprint. If you run too fast out of the gate, i.e. skipping requirements gathering, chances are you will not reach the finish line at a steady pace. You may not even reach it at all. The requirements document funnel shows you how requirements documentation flows through several major planning activities into build and design. So essentially, if you're able to gather good requirements, you can define the scope. Defining a solid scope helps you to eliminate scope creep. If the scope is solid, I can draft good work breakdown structures, which naturally lead to a much more defined project plan and an accurate schedule. This allows the project team to build and validate deliverables on time and within budget. Remember, requirements build the foundation for everything else that follows. Now that we understand what requirements documentation is and why it's essential, let's walk through how to create it using the AIRTOC framework. I'm going to switch over to the live demo so we can build the AIRTOC template for requirements documentation step by step. Let's go. Okay, team, before we get started on requirements, there's always something that we like to make sure folks understand before we go through our demonstration. For the sake of time and simplicity, we will be using simulated minimal data. In real projects, you'll probably have a lot more context to add to the prompt. Second, even with simplified data, you'll still see how powerful AIRTOC can be. Remember, the more context you add, though, the better your outputs are going to be. And lastly, this process applies to every AIRTOC template in the textbook. The workflow is universal and repeatable across all deliverables. Let's go ahead and dive in. So time for a quick overview of what this demonstration comprises of. You're going to have a few different elements, so we're going to go over them now. The first one is the AIRTOC template for requirements documentation. This is the same template that you'll find in your textbooks and your AIRTOC template library. Below that, we have an actual simulation or a real-world scenario. that we're going to use in order to draft up the requirements document. Below that, we have our simulation data, which is in red so that you can indicate the template from the actual simulation data that we're going to use to prompt. And from there, we have our AIMPM Project Management Coach, which is exclusive to AIMPM members. You guys can use this to place these prompts. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the first part of the demonstration. Okay, so starting with the AIRTOC template for requirements documentation, the framework remains the same. You have your AI platform, role, task, and output, and context on the left-hand side. And again, AI produces is just an example of what AI should produce for you once you complete the query. All right, so let's start with AI platform. We recommend Gemini or ChatGPT for this query. For the role, we have a business analyst or a project manager. And remember, requirements gathering is more of a business analyst role than it is a project manager role. And we always like to add in a lot more detail to these templates to give you guys a place to start. And we recommend this role for the requirements gathering documentation. The task is going to be to draft requirements documentation, consolidating stakeholder inputs into structured traceable requirements. The output is going to be a comprehensive requirements documentation. And our inputs for context, we have scope, baseline, problem, and goal, constraints, risks, and stakeholders. And for our data, we have some stakeholder data, some business data, technical data, functional data, non-functional data, and some traceability data. Okay. And again, these may be actual individual documents you may need to retrieve, copy and paste into your prompt in order for you to get the proper context data in there. So now let's take a look at our scenario to see what it's about. Our scenario says the organization's manual workflows were producing frequent errors, long approval cycles, and compliance gaps, prompting leadership to mandate detailed requirements for an automated enterprise workflow system. Early stakeholder interviews revealed conflicting priorities across operations, finance, HR, and compliance, requiring structured requirements to prevent ambiguity in downstream work. Integration with the ERP, HRIS, and ITSM systems introduced technical and performance constraints that needed to be explicitly captured before vendors could finalize architecture. Compliance teams required audit traceability, data privacy controls, and financial authorization thresholds to be formally documented to avoid audit findings. The PM and BA were instructed to develop comprehensive requirements documentation, functional, non-functional, traceable, and testable, to guide design, build, and vendor configuration work. Okay, pretty deep scenario. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we added into our template here. Okay, so again, the AI platform, role, task, and output don't necessarily need to change. These are good instructions for the AI to take. What really matters is your context, right? So again, we had scope here, so we added in the scope of work that we need to do. We added in our baseline, problem, and goal. We added in our financial constraints and time constraints. In terms of risks, we added those in. We added our stakeholder group in. We added in some stakeholder data. We added in some business data, some technical data, functional data, non-functional use cases, etc. Right? And again, this is still dummy data per se, but once you go in and actually add the real context into this, it's going to make this prompt a lot more powerful in a real world situation. All right, so let's go ahead and copy this into our project management coach. All right, so I'll just copy and paste things in. I'll make sure the right input is there. And again, I'm not adding any additional prompts to this. This GPT understands what to do when it receives the AIRTOC template. So I'll go in here and I'll just hit the go button and let's see what we get. Okay, we're starting to cut through. And if AI slows down like this, don't worry, it's thinking. Right. And that's kind of what you want. I find it funny. Sometimes the faster the prompt comes out, the more inaccurate it is. Okay. So let's take a look here. What do we have? We have requirements documentation draft V1. You have your executive summary. You have your scope definition, stakeholder summary, high level requirements breakdown. Then it starts to get into the actual functional requirements. Okay. And now this drafts your requirements in the way that an actual business analyst would draft your requirements, right? You can tell by the terminology, the system shall, the system shall, the system shall. And requirements speak, this means that it better do this thing here, right? That we're putting in terms of this requirement. So you have an entire set of functional requirements, non-functional requirements, compliance requirements, and constraints. You also have a number of risks, requirements traceability matrix, right, which you can expand upon, acceptance criteria examples, open requirements, and next steps. Okay. This may take you maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 hours to generate once you have all of the information. Why? Because you actually have to separate things like functional and non-functional requirements. If you don't really know what the difference is between a functional and a non-functional requirement, that's where you're going to get stuck, right? That's where a lot of your time is going to be spent. We can take this information, throw it into an Excel spreadsheet if we need to. We can take this entire document and start to break it out and add in more information if we need to, right? This gives you a great skeleton to start with for a requirements document. It covers all of the pieces that you need. And this is actually something that you'll be able to share with an executive group or a project team in order to make sure that everyone's aligned on those requirements. This is the power of AIRTOC. We take a very minimal set of data and we massage it the way that AI likes to see it, and AI will give us information back in a way that is very good, very deep in knowledge, and takes just a little bit of time to iterate through for you to get the final product. Okay? So that's requirements documentation, and we'll go ahead and jump into the next video. Thank you, guys. I'll see you soon.